Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Wave Global. Today, in a special episode, we will be discussing a very pertinent issue relating to Pakistan, which is the state of air pollution, what are its causes, and what are some of the policies that we can implement in order to ease into a greener, cleaner energy. So with me, I have a very special guest, Hassan Aftab Sheikh. He completed his PhD in Earth Sciences from University of Cambridge, where he specialized in air pollution. He has done a lot of research and co-authored a few papers specifically on air pollution in Pakistan, and also works on transitioning into a greener energy, ways to transition into greener energy. He is currently a Nature Finance Fellow at the University of Oxford. So we're really happy to host you, Hassan,
Thank
for
you.
this.
Thanks very much.
So before we sort of go into my first question, I'll just sort of lay out the context for the discussion. So very recently, and I'd say it has been going on for quite a while, but very recently, like coming from Lahore, I personally observed that the air pollution has sort of worsened when we sort of reached the winter break, November, December, and some of those months. It's sort of the smog essentially takes over most of northern Punjab, and our inability to deal with it obviously is due to years of policy mistakes. I'm sure of that. But now this is something that we just can't solve overnight. We need stable and consistent policy interventions to, deal with it. But before we, go ahead and discuss some of these, I would just like to give the stage to Hassan to so that he can elaborate on like what exactly is the problem,
Mhm.
how bad is it essentially,
Mhm.
and is there even hope to like deal with it? Are we at the point of no return? Like the floor is
Mhm.
yours.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So the air pollution problem in Pakistan, it's not just Lahore specific, and Lahore, of course, comes into headlines because it's a bigger city comparatively to Islamabad. You would think it's worse, which it is, but only slightly worse than other cities in Pakistan. And the reason also being that a lot of the cities, which are tier two cities in Pakistan, do not have that kind of data, which is low cost monitoring or any monitoring of any sort happening that would give us any information of how bad the air quality is. So, in Pakistan's context, we need to go back and see the regional air pollution sources, how the air basically is kind of there's transboundary, transboundary movement of air which moves the pollutants with it. And this is the region specifically, which is northern Punjab. You have KP, you have parts of southern Punjab, you have parts of India, most of India's UP, you have their Punjab, and then you also it extends to Bangladesh. So this region is called Indo-Gangetic Plain. This is where the Indus and the Ganga River basically runs, and it's basically a valley. Imagine that it's a valley, or it's a airshed. It's in technical terms, it's an airshed. But what happens is anything that gets trapped in is produced there in terms of any air emissions gets trapped, and unless and until there's a low pressure system. So basically, if there are winds or there's any precipitation, these pollutants rarely get dispersed. So anything that's getting produced is also, imagine it's like a hot box and it's just getting concentrated. For Pakistan, I wouldn't say there isn't hope. Of course, there is a lot to be done. It is policy failures, as you have talked about. There are sources where there are low-hanging fruits where we can do a lot of work. And of course, it's the provincial governments who have to step up and play their part. It's recently, just to put some context, Punjab government in, I think, last week has started their smog campaign, as you were talking about, and they have published this big report, big advertisement in newspapers talking about how big of a problem air pollution is, and how, quoting a report from Urban Unit, they're saying, oh, 80% of the problem is the vehicles, and it's because of you guys. So you know
Mm,
how they've just put it on the people. First, 80% is not the correct kind of source apportionment, and they've done it based on certain methodology that cannot. I personally think that is not the number we should be using. Of course, Urban Unit is, it's based in Lahore. They do really good research, but the number is not 80% is not attributed to vehicles.
oh,
There are other sources. Of course, I'm not saying transport is not the biggest fraction. It's still probably the biggest fraction, maybe at 50, 60%, but not at 80% as it's being quoted. And then the onus is put on the people on how their use of private vehicles. Of course, people are using private vehicles, but
yeah,
there is no incentive to use public transport. There are no alternatives.
yeah.
So we have to talk about those as well.
Yeah, it sort of feels like that the state is jerking off its burden, and because of we'll delve into the political economy aspect
Yeah.
as well, but essentially to point that out, uh, cities like urban centers of Pakistan, like Lahore, are not really pedestrian friendly. So
Mhm,
if we're in London, we tend to walk places, but over here
mhm,
we have to, because of our for our safety, use more cars, and just
mhm,
sort of blaming it on people
mhm.
without coming with a systematic
Solutions.
policy solution. It's just, they're just telling we can't really do much. But uh, touching base on essentially that, uh, one of our biggest problem is reliance on non-renewable sources of energy. And
Mhm,
even from as a student of economics, most of our debt servicing goes towards paying for oil imports or from abroad. Uh, do you think there has been steps taken to transition into using more cleaner sources of energy? And
mhm,
to what extent have they happened? Why
mhm,
have we not been able, why have we not able to use our full potential? Because from given that there's Lahore and northern and central Punjab has a lot of sunny days throughout the year, we can leverage that into using the solar power for
mhm,
for instance. So
mhm,
what do you think about that?
mhm. So on that context, as in Pakistan right now is going through a major, I would say it's the economic crisis is actually driven by mostly the energy debt servicing you've just mentioned. And for I think Pakistan made some bad decisions around 5, 6 years ago.
Mm,
And the idea was that, okay, our country would have industry which will fill up the demand for energy, and IPPs were installed. Most of them are coal run, and as you've mentioned, coal and oil, for example, it's the one of the most polluting forms of energy, just not just in terms of non-greenhouse gas emissions, but of course the greenhouse gas emissions that come with it. Pakistan has been trying right now to renegotiate some of the contracts. The problem is that some of these contracts are with local service providers, but most of these are with Chinese entities, right? And if you have to retire a coal-fired power plant or any power plant where there's an agreement done with an investor, and these are binding agreements, it's not that, okay, you go and you're like, okay, I'm giving a 2 month notice to my landlord, and I'm like, okay,
yeah,
I want an exit. So
yeah,
this is not how it happens. And what's happened in Pakistan is that we are trying to renegotiate those long-term power purchase agreements. And in such settings, not just removing barriers to solar or any renewable energy deployment would be enough, because Pakistan right now needs to focus more on how can you how can you come out of this without putting a big burden on the consumers. And right now, of course, the burden is going on to the consumers, and people are paying for the capacity payments. So yeah, as in it's not that there hasn't been an effort. The current government has realized that we need a way out. But the thing is, they are still trying to figure out what's the best way out. So you can't, we're not a rich country that we have access money lying around and we're like, okay, here you go, we have a few million, $100 million and just shut it down. And
Yeah.
we're going to shut it down because of our economic problems, not because, oh, we want to transition to green
Or clean
energy.
energy. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
So, yeah, even recently there was this outcry that the nature of the IPP agreements, basically puts the government in a position where they can't renegotiate and, implement such helpful policies. So just as we progress, I'd like to sort of bring some attention because you've done some research on this as well.
mhm,
Uh, so, uh, in order for us to retire some of our coal power plants, for
mhm,
instance, it's one of
mhm,
the biggest contributors to pollution. Uh, is there like a suitable theoretical mechanism for doing so? And
mhm,
given that you've done some work on it, can you like just elaborate on, let's say,
mhm,
the the theoretical ways to facilitate early retirement of coal power plants, and then go into specific limitations that might exist in Pakistan, and given those limitations, you know, even are these theoretical models applicable? Because we always tend to use, models from different countries and try to implement them in the context of Pakistan. The only issue is that one size doesn't fit all.
mhm,
So like, any insights that you have on that?
mhm. So, in that context, I think there are, of course, very different exit policies that exist in OECD countries, but there's susceptibility of, some rent-seeking entities or stakeholders because there's not a lot of information symmetry in countries like Pakistan. One of the things which people are talking about a lot is okay, we can auction our plants and someone pays for it, someone who's a private investor. But auctions have worked in countries like Germany, but Germany is a rich country. Their coal power plants were much older than that of Pakistan, and not just Pakistan, all the countries where China has financed these coal power plants. These are younger power plants. So when we talk about early retirement strategies or early retirement financing strategies of this, we have to be very sure that there are only limited options that countries like Pakistan can access. And if we go more into detail for that, there are different various costs involved with closing down power plants. We also have we do say that the energy mix of our country is not as carbon intensive, and we have hydro and everything, and climate change ministry would be talking about it. But the problem is that the biggest problem in Pakistan is not that we have access energy, but it is about how much reliant our grid system is on coal and
Mm.
oil and all these IPPs and fossil fuel run energy. The reason being that we don't have a very effective grid integration. So the problem of intermittency, as long as that exists, we need to be very kind of cautious on what looks like a good exit for us. We don't want like an exit and then not have, you know, energy when we are only relying on solar, for example. So in financing terms, there are some cases which have worked in Southeast Asia, but again, they've been backed by multi-development banks or World Bank, for example. So there's this idea of, for example, you might have heard of just transition transaction, which has been going on in South Africa to phase out their coal power plants. It's been something that has been also going on in Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, etc. So there's this very theoretical model, as in there is a paper which,
So
yeah.
basically, I was wondering if you could just shed some light on this JTT model that
Okay.
you,
Yep.
because for our audience who may not know exactly what kind
Mhm.
of policy this is.
Yeah,
So,
so basically what a JTT is, it's a financial instrument. It's basically a climate financing mechanism that offers concessionary loans to developing countries. So basically loans offered at interest rates lower than the commercial or market rate. And what happens is that this has twofold effect. It encourages coal retirement and then also investment in renewable energy. The way they're developed is that they're developed with countries co-signing these loans, mostly developed countries, such as US, for example, and it reduces the costs of borrowing to the recipient nations. So what a tiered JTT model, the way it works is, this is something which is, of course, very theoretical, and it has two levels, so that there are two tiers. One tier is that you have a national level milestone set, and the national level milestone is set specific to the country. So in Pakistan context, it would be specific to our country's priorities for energy transition targets. If that's coal power retirement, that's solar expansion, it's reforms into grid integration. And then there are the second tier is the regional level milestones. And this is very important because this goal depends on cooperation efforts involving your neighbors. So in our context, it has to be India, for example. I think India is something which we should be working towards together on energy standards or grid integration and having very similar market policies. For instance, this would be very useful if there's an integrated grid and any intermittency issues would not exist in countries like Pakistan then. But of course, this needs a lot of work done beyond finance. There's a big political kind of, angle to it, which needs to be taken into the account.
I think it's time that these issues are put at the forefront as opposed to, issues that may concern specific political rhetorics.
Mm-hmm,
The situation is just getting worse and worse every year.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm not sure exactly. We talked about the problems beyond Lahore, but Lahore ranks, I think, amongst the top three cities that are like with the worst air condition.
Air
So
quality.
air pollution, sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like, is there like any specific attempts done over time to have uh, interventions like the JTT being take place in Pakistan, or has it not functioned yet? Do you think is it specifically applicable in Pakistan given our circumstances,
Mm.
uh, or would it just increase our over reliance on foreign loans, which we may not, seem to take up right now, given we already have
Mm.
another debt crisis going on? So.
For something like a tier JTT, of course, Pakistan would really like something like that to happen. But the thing is, who is willing to give us that amount of access money, right? If we are to go for that early retirement stage where we are offering, let's say, interest rate subsidies, which are basically you're offering debt and equity holders money to retire the plant early. The thing is, who is going to give us that money? We don't have the budget. If we are going to ask, external stakeholders, developed countries, other multi, development banks, what's what are we telling them that, okay, we've changed, etc. Or,
Yeah.
in terms of regional cooperation or grid integration, you did talk about how we have a lot of solar. The problem is not that we don't have money to put solar up. People consumers can just put their, and in Lahore, lots of people have it's been very consumer centric, expansion, scalability of domestic usage of solar panels has been just led by private households. The problem there lies, what is Pakistan doing in terms of integrating, having that in an integrated grid? There is no integrated grid. Pakistan has massive energy losses. It's very inefficient. And unless and until politically there is more effort done on having a strategy of what our energy policy would look like in the next, or our energy mix would look like in the next 5 to 10 years, no one would be willing to give us that extra money um, to do that. Of course, Pakistan's government has been trying for climate reparations and how we do need money for the energy transition as of now. And that case should be made. I think that's a very good case which Pakistan can make and can get those concessionary loans and grants in the form of grants as well to make this transition happen. But there has to be commitment from inside.
So, we've talked about how this transition to, solar energy has been very consumer centric, and it's basically private individuals trying to, in order to make sure that their electricity costs are reduced, they tend
Hmm.
to solar.
Hmm.
Even the government, as we've seen in their statements, try to pin the entire problem onto the people. But what we have to sort of, actualize here is that most of this problem arises from how industries from time, like the brunt of the problem lies with industrial air pollution, like air pollution that comes from massive industries. We have the sugarcane industry, which is known for burning its waste produce that contributes to smog. I may not be an expert on that, but this is one of the issues that I read about. And secondly, even then, with the IPP agreements, these industries tend to have a really strong grip over anything that they want to do. And you need to build consensus and take their, consent into account when, even when, trying to come up with something. So,
Hmm.
uh, based on that, some countries, especially there's been one in some policies in India, especially in the state of Bihar, about starting carbon credit markets, essentially, which is, you try to ban, you try to fine industries that go beyond a certain percentage of, greenhouse gas emissions. Just a very basic explanation of it. Uh, what do you think about this? Especially since, this has been discussed even at a global level with global cooperation amongst countries, like having a joint carbon credit market amongst several countries. What do you
Hmm.
think, this specifically?
So are in this context, are you saying that the any industry would be okay to pollute if they pay for it?
Yeah,
This
something
context, so
A
they,
that A that B, is it even,
but there are different carbon markets, right? So in this context, are you suggesting that a polluter keeps polluting if can keep polluting beyond their threshold if they're paying for it, right?
so I mean, you may be an ex you might know better on this, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially, isn't it that you need to you buy a certain market cap, and if you want to pollute one, you can, these market caps are tradable
Mm-hmm.
between industries.
Yeah, this is so yeah, as in this is problematic. This has not worked,
Yeah.
and this is not something that would work in Pakistan for sure. There is already a credibility crisis in the carbon offset market. For example, you're particularly talking about carbon tax, in I think that's what you were referring to, and not the carbon offset market. But even if you're saying we put a cap and people are able to trade, corporations are able to trade their any access
The
carbon
permits.
permits they have. No, this has not worked, and this would not work in the context of Pakistan. The corporation lobbies. Pakistan has bigger issues than greenhouse gas emissions as of
Yeah,
now.
they
As in,
want.
our bigger issues are that, okay, you have to tax the pollutant, then you should also be taxing private vehicle use, right? Why aren't you taxing a consumer, right?
Yeah.
And this would not happen. This will be so unpopular. No government would do it. This has been so unpopular in the West. In
No,
Pakistan, this would never work.
no.
It wouldn't, I'm not saying it would not work. It would not work right now. It might not work in the next 10 years as well, but maybe it works in the next 50 years. But
But
if we are talking about the problem right now, carbon, and there's an inherent issue with this. I think this entire issue of having these permits and allowing corporations to keep polluting if they pay money for it, this is not an ideal policy.
yeah, uh, I mean, there can be variations of it for sure, but given that Pakistan's logistical circumstances do not facilitate such a policy, in an ideal circumstances where they uh, do you think this intrinsically there is a problem with this policy, or do you think it's just that the context of Pakistan may not allow it to function efficiently?
There is intrinsically a problem with having these carbon caps and then paying beyond that, because what you're essentially saying is that okay, as long as you pay us and we'll basically maybe use that money to do some other renewable projects or maybe plant some trees, that has been problematic. There's intrinsically wrong. So if we have to phase out of carbon emissions and we have to be on a path to net zero, you have to just cut down carbon emissions. You don't,
Mm.
allow corporations to keep polluting and then you're like, okay, pay us some money
Yeah.
and it'll be okay.
Yeah, I know, and then obviously in the context of Pakistan, the payment of fines essentially is also, uh, involves a lot of collusion, and we
Yeah,
never.
and there's asymmetry in information, right? And I don't, you're an economist, I'm not. Tell me, how are you going to price that for Pakistan? It's so difficult to price that in. I'm, let's say, a stakeholder as well. I live near a coal power plant, and I'll be like, okay, pay me. Why am I polluting this air, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So, what about the civil society? What about people who go through health implications because of these polluting industries? So you have to just cut them down. You don't let them pollute and be like, okay, Hassan, you have a lung problem. Let's, here you go, 10,000 rupees for, and how many people would you give that money to?
Yeah, that's not solving the problem.
Yeah, it's not solving. It's
Yeah,
basically
and
continuing the problem, and it's actually incentivizing a, not incentivizing, it's actually just making it not holding the corporation responsible for it. It's like, okay, just pay us some money and keep doing it. So,
and from a behavioral economics lens, now the corporations might feel that they don't have to, move to cleaner energy because they can just pay a fine over it.
exactly.
Yeah, as long as they are able to do so, or
Of
even
course.
if they don't do so, even if they just collude with your authorities over the payment of
As in
fine.
Volkswagen tried to do that. I don't know if you've read about the Volkswagen fiasco as in back in the 2000s, and this happened, and of course they were caught because they claimed that it was much less polluting their car, and it wasn't, so they had to pay up.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, based on this, we obviously, it means that our problem is not the distribution of, uh, uh, greenhouse gases and these pollutants, but the existence of them in the first place. So, like, we just need to cut them down exponentially. So I think that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, Hassan, for talking with us and helping our audience understand some of the problems and
Mhm.
especially their applicability in Pakistan. And we hope to someday host you again with
Mhm.
discussing a derivation of this subfield. So thank you so much, Hassan. Thanks for
Thank you. Thanks very much.